Thank you, Mr. President. The Philippines notes with grave concern the recent escalation of hostilities in the Middle East. We condemn the killings, terrorist attacks, and other acts of violence by Hamas that took place in Israel on the 7th of October 2023, and in this regard acknowledge the right of Israel to self-defense in accordance with the UN Charter. We mourn the loss of innocent lives and extend our sympathies to all the affected civilians in Israel and the Palestinian territories. We deeply regret the violation of international humanitarian law, which has imperiled the safety of civilian populations. In light of the alarming state of civilian casualties, we call on all parties to respect international humanitarian law. We express concern at the massive destruction of health and medical facilities that further increases unnecessary human suffering. The ongoing conflict deeply concerns us with its broad and profound impact on countless innocent civilians, including Filipino nationals and their families. Joining the call of the international community, the Philippines strongly urges the swift release of all hostages. We call for the end of the taking and detainment of individuals, particularly women and children. We reiterate our plea to the international community to come together and provide essential humanitarian aid and support to the affected. Most importantly, we urge all concerned to immediately put in place urgent solutions that would prevent the conflict from further escalating, spreading, and protracting. The Philippines supports the efforts of the United Nations to deliver urgent humanitarian assistance and essential supplies to Palestinian civilians caught in the midst of the conflict in the Gaza Strip. We commend UNRWA, UNOCHA, and other related UN agencies for their efforts and sacrifice amidst these challenging times. The Philippines lends its full support to calls for ensuring the safety of civilians seeking refuge in UNRWA premises across Gaza. We welcome the opening of a humanitarian corridor with Egypt, as it is important that the UN humanitarian system be supported and is enabled to respond to the scale of the needs of the affected populations in a predictable and sustainable manner. We are also hopeful for a solution to be reached in the soonest possible time in order for the Rafah crossing to start receiving foreign nationals, including our Filipinos still in Gaza. We also continue to support UN peacekeeping missions in the region. We believe that the multilateral approach is crucial in addressing the crisis and preventing further escalation. The Philippines urges the Security Council to endorse and support coordinated efforts with UN entities for the safe evacuation and protection of migrants in conflict zones. We earnestly appeal to all parties involved to cooperate in safeguarding their security. With approximately 30,000 Filipino nationals in Israel and a further 130 in Gaza, their safety and well-being remain paramount to us. Reaffirming our position, the Philippines firmly supports a two-state solution, consistently aligned with past international agreements and relevant UN resolutions. Both Israelis and Palestinians deserve a future where their rights, aspirations, and security are recognized and upheld. This enduring Israeli-Palestinian conflict remains a pivotal determinant for the peace and stability of the region. A lasting resolution can only be achieved through comprehensive dialogues and negotiations anchored firmly in international law. The Philippines ardently urges all parties to elevate dialogue as the primary tool for a peaceful and lasting resolution. Mr. President, following the inability of the Security Council to act on many resolutions on the crisis brought to its chamber, it is now incumbent upon the General Assembly to take action, do the utmost to bridge the divides, and champion the path to peace. The resolution ES10/L.25, as adopted today, includes many elements which the Philippines supports. Notably, it condemns all acts of violence against both Israeli and Palestinian civilians. It calls for respect for international humanitarian law, access for humanitarian assistance to address the large-scale needs in Gaza, and immediate and unconditional release of innocent civilians being held captive. It also reaffirms our long-standing support for a two-state solution with a safe and independent Palestine and a secure Israel living in peace. Overall, it expresses the grave concern of the international community over the situation, which the Philippines genuinely shares. We condole with all victims and their families and pray for a peaceful resolution of this conflict. However, as we would condemn all terrorist attacks, the resolution does not mention nor condemn the terrorist attack of 7 October by Hamas, leading to the death of innocent civilians, including women and children, as well as some Filipinos. Because of this attack, we recognize Israel's right to self-defense as provided for under Article 51 of the UN Charter, reflected in the resolution. Therefore, despite commendable efforts of the co-sponsors to improve the original text, for these reasons, my delegation abstained on the resolution. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Philippines. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Republic of Korea voted in favor of the amendment put forward by Canada and then abstained on the resolution proposed by Jordan, especially because the Canadian amendment was not adopted. We believe that the language condemning Hamas and calling on an immediate and unconditional release of all hostages taken by Hamas are essential elements that should be included in the resolution. Let us be reminded that the rapidly deteriorating situation in Israel and Gaza commenced with the brutal terrorist attacks by Hamas. The Republic of Korea condemns in the strongest possible terms these unjustifiable terrorist attacks. We believe that all states have the right and duty to protect themselves and their citizens in compliance with their obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law. Mr. President, we have already witnessed over 8,000 fatalities on both sides, most of whom are civilians. The death toll is rapidly increasing. Even at this very moment, innocent civilians are losing their lives. Civilians should not be a target. Taking this opportunity, I'd also like to convey my deepest condolences to the families of the 53 UN humanitarian workers who have been killed in Gaza since the beginning of the fighting on the 7th of October. Irrespective of nationality, gender, age, ethnicity, or faith, all civilians must be protected. It is extremely painful to bear witness to more and more civilians, especially women and children, suffering immensely because of this conflict. All parties to the conflict must abide by the rules under international humanitarian law, including the principle of distinction. In addition, the rapid, unimpeded, and sustained passage of humanitarian aid must be allowed. We urge the establishment of pragmatic measures, including humanitarian pause and humanitarian corridor. Time is of the essence, as we stand on the edge of the precipice of a humanitarian catastrophe. We urge the relevant parties on the ground to continue all diplomatic efforts to facilitate rapid safe, and unimpeded delivery of humanitarian assistance for innocent civilians. Mr. President, enmity among states and widespread hatred among people, these are what extremist groups in the region desire. We cannot and must not allow this. Our common humanity simply must prevail. My delegation would like to stress that this situation must not spill over to other parts of the region. Such a spillover benefits no one. Thus, all major players in the region should continue to exert their redoubled diplomatic efforts to de-escalate this conflict. Mr. President, protecting civilians and preventing spillover must serve as our guiding priorities at this fragile moment. However, in addition, we all know that the issue of Israel and Palestine is not something that started on the 7th of October. It has been going on for decades. That is why it is crucial to establish a durable peace solution to end these repeated atrocities and break the cycle of violence. The Republic of Korea believes that sustainable, lasting peace in this region can only be achieved through sincere negotiations based on the two-state solution with security and dignity for all. The current catastrophic situation also reminds us in the most poignant way of the urgent need for sincere dialogue to discuss, contemplate, and hammer out every aspect related to this extremely complicated issue with the long-term goal in mind. We strongly believe that even during this bloody and inflamed juncture, all diplomatic channels among relevant countries and parties should actively continue to operate behind the scenes. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ireland, speaking on behalf of a group of countries.
Thank you, President. I have the honour to speak on behalf of the following states that have voted in favour of this resolution: Belgium, Luxembourg, Slovenia, Spain, and my own country, Ireland. We have supported this resolution as it addresses steps that must be implemented with the utmost urgency in order to protect civilian lives and increase the provision of humanitarian aid. At the same time, we emphasise that this resolution does not comprehensively reflect our position. In particular, we wish to reiterate our condemnation in the strongest possible terms of the brutal terrorist attacks by Hamas that took place in Israel starting on the 7th of October 2023. There is never any justification for terrorist attacks against civilians in any circumstances. We strongly condemn the taking of hostages and demand their immediate and unconditional release. We regret, therefore, that the amendment tabled by Canada failed to be adopted. We strongly emphasise Israel's right to defend itself in line with international law, including international humanitarian law. We fully support the demand in the resolution that all parties comply with their obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law and international human rights law. We additionally emphasise the prohibitions under international humanitarian law of the taking of hostages and of the use of civilians as human shields, and the requirement to avoid locating military objectives within or near densely populated areas. These are serious violations of the rule of law which put civilians at unconscionable risk. We fully support calls for humanitarian pauses and humanitarian corridors. We underline the urgent need to secure sufficient and unhindered provision of essential goods and services to civilians throughout the Gaza Strip. We underline the importance of allowing full, rapid, safe and unhindered access for all humanitarian organisations. We commend UNRWA and other UN organisations and humanitarian actors for their selfless work in support of the people of Gaza and across the Middle East, and we offer our condolences to those who have lost their lives. It remains of utmost importance to restore a political horizon. The resolution we have just adopted makes it clear. We reaffirm that a just and lasting solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict can only be achieved by peaceful means, based on the relevant United Nations resolutions and in accordance with international law and on the basis of the two-state solution. We support the attempts, including through the Peace Day effort, aimed at reviving a political process on the basis of the two-state solution that meets Israeli and Palestinian security needs and Palestinian aspirations for statehood and sovereignty. We urge all partners to redouble efforts to foster consensus and promote meaningful engagement to this end. And we regret that the UN Security Council has not been able to pronounce itself on the situation.
I thank the distinguished representative of Ireland. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
شكرا.
Thank you, Mr. President. At times like these, yes, as this meeting is happening, we are receiving news that Israel has indeed launched a barbaric ground offensive against Gaza. And this, of course, will leave behind large numbers of civilian casualties that are unimaginable to us. Israel even cut off communications and internet in Gaza, hoping it would be able to cover up for its barbaric crimes against the sisterly Palestinian people. How will some Western countries, with the United States at the lead, how will they, after giving us migraines with their calls for human rights, how will they justify this crime? This barbaric attack can in no way be justified by what these countries describe falsely and unjustifiably Israel's right to self-defense. Mr. President, the world has grown sick and tired of the hypocrisy and lies of some Western states today. And in another dark page in the book of Israeli crimes, we see the continuation of the bloody Israeli attack on Gaza for the 20th day straight. The extreme and the level of Israeli massacres has reached a level that's unimaginable. They have killed 7,000 civilians, most of them women and children. Not even rocks were spared. The Baptist hospital was bombed, so was a church, as well as residential areas, journalists, doctors, engineers, students, and even United Nations staff. Nothing has been spared in Gaza from Israel's barbarism. The other side of the ISIS terrorist coin, and a source of shame to some Western states, with the United States in the lead. The United States that has offered them protection and impunity and given them a carte blanche so that Israeli fascists can kill the Palestinian people, preventing the Security Council from upholding its responsibility to put an end to this aggression and to put an end to the war crimes, the crimes against humanity that Israel is perpetrating. Mr. President, our delegation voted in favor of the draft resolution that we just voted on at the General Assembly because it primarily aims to stop the barbaric Israeli war machine. It calls for an immediate halt of this aggression and to delivery of humanitarian aid, rejecting the forced eviction of Palestinians. However, my delegation would like to express its reservation over some of the language mentioned in it, and that might be construed as equalizing the Israeli aggressor and the occupied Palestinian people, between the murderer and the victim, between the killer and those being killed. In closing, we would like to renew on behalf of Syria our full support for the sisterly Palestinian people and the legitimate right and struggle that was guaranteed by international law, and the Palestinian people's right to establish an independent state with Jerusalem as its capital. I ask that this statement be registered in the official record of this meeting. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Syrian Arab Republic. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of El Salvador.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. El Salvador would like to welcome the adoption of the resolution protection of civilians and upholding legal and humanitarian obligations, which we consider to be a concrete and tangible result of this emergency special session of the United Nations General Assembly. My country believes that the text recently adopted by this Assembly is an urgent response and a balanced one, which is placed at the very core of this organization, and that is the protection of all civilians as well as the urgent provision of humanitarian assistance. President El Salvador condemned and will continue to condemn all terrorist acts, whatever its motivation is and wherever it takes place, and by whomever it is undertaken. We ask that we stop indiscriminate attacks as well as aggression against all civilians. We ask that we bring an end to human suffering and also to widespread destruction. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of El Salvador. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Tunisia.
شكرا.
Thank you, Mr. President. Tunisia decided to abstain in the vote over the draft resolution because we believe that the dangerous and unprecedented situation in the Gaza Strip as a result of the continued Israeli barbaric onslaught on the Palestinian people and the closures and the prevention of all forms of basic life from reaching millions of Palestinians requires a much higher threshold and a clearer position. And despite the fact that this draft resolution does call for facilitating the delivery of humanitarian aid and preventing the eviction of Palestinians, however, it did not clearly and strongly condemn the crimes of war and the crimes of genocide that are being perpetrated by the occupying powers. Moreover, it does not call for holding accountable the occupier for its crimes. It did not clearly stipulate and call for an immediate halt to the aggression, and it also put the victim and the murderer on an equal footing. Therefore, we have continued our efforts to offer amendments. However, those amendments were only focused on giving the occupying powers more free rein in perpetrating their crimes. Therefore, we were called to vote on a draft resolution that will only make things worse and will deepen the suffering of the Palestinians. And therefore, we decided to abstain from voting on the resolution, and this is to uphold Tunisia's principled position, which refuses that the aggressor and the aggressed be treated equally, and which stresses that there must be a clear condemnation of the aggression of the occupation against the Palestinian people. These are principled positions in our policy, and we do not allow for them to be dismissed in a resolution being issued in such difficult circumstances. We will continue our firm and principled support for the Palestinian people and their legitimate rights and for the establishment of the Palestinian state on their territories. We hope that United Nations resolutions that have exceeded 1,000 are respected and implemented to put an end to the aggression and on the Palestinian people and their suffering, and to put an end to the occupation, and so that things must be called as they are, because shelling hospitals and killing children and women and harming millions of innocent civilians and targeting houses of worship and houses of residence cannot be used as self-defense. Rather, this is a war crime, while the right to self-determination and the right to resisting occupation and rejecting discrimination, racial discrimination, are now considered terrorism. We call the international community, the Security Council, General Assembly, to shoulder their responsibilities and put an end to all of these mistaken practices and half answers. The Palestinian people must be allowed to enjoy their rights that will continue to exist, and they must also enjoy the protection that they deserve. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Tunisia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Australia.
Thank you, President. First, Australia expresses appreciation for Jordan's leadership and sincere efforts in bringing forward Resolution L25. We agree with the central proposition that the humanitarian situation in Gaza is dire and human suffering is widespread and unacceptable. Australia again calls for humanitarian pauses in hostilities so that food, water, medicine and other essential assistance can reach people in desperate need and so that civilians can get to safety. However, we abstained with disappointment because we believe the resolution as drafted was incomplete. The resolution did not recognise the terror group Hamas as a perpetrator of the 7 October attack, and Australia again explicitly calls for the immediate and unconditional release of hostages. Moreover, the United Nations Charter guarantees national sovereignty. We believe the General Assembly can affirm Israel's right to exist without denying long-standing and legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people, including to statehood, aspirations which Australia supports. We can affirm Israel's right to defend itself while also saying the way it does so matters. It matters for innocent civilians who should not pay for horrors perpetrated by Hamas. And it matters for Israel's ongoing security, which would face grave threats if conflict were to spill over across the region. Aspirations for peace and security for Israelis and Palestinians will recede even further if today's generations are motivated by grief and resentment resulting from this crisis. This Assembly of Nations has no less a duty than to seek to solve the insoluble and transform despair into hope. And despite disagreement on this resolution, efforts behind the scenes make clear that most member states are acting in good faith and want to chart a path out of this crisis towards a political process. That political process must end in a just and enduring peace in the form of a two-state solution where Israelis and Palestinians can live securely and prosperously within internationally recognised borders.
That two-state solution must be the new reality that overcomes entrenched ideologies. President, achieving that reality calls for us to see each other's humanity. It requires all states and all sides to respect the right of others to exist. And it will require leadership, understanding and courage. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Australia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sri Lanka.
Mr. President, thank you for giving me the floor. My delegation, Mr. President, voted in favor of the resolution L25 submitted by Jordan on behalf of the Arab group. Mr. President, the paramount need of the hour is the cessation of hostilities, the release of hostages, and enable the provision of humanitarian aid to those in dire need. The essence of the resolution presented by Jordan captures these needs adequately. It also captures the need to respect international humanitarian law and international human rights law. Furthermore, the resolution reaffirms that a just and lasting solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict can only be achieved by peaceful means based on the relevant United Nations resolutions in accordance with international law and founded upon the two-state solution. This is a position that Sri Lanka has consistently maintained. Mr. President, Sri Lanka condemns terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. That includes the terrorist attacks that took place on the 7th of October on the civilian population in Israel. The Jordanian resolution, however, takes cognizance of the 7th of October attack and the increase in violence since then, and condemns all acts of violence against Palestinian and Israeli civilians, including all acts of terror and indiscriminate attacks, as well as all the acts of provocation, incitement, and destruction. Accordingly, my delegation desisted from supporting the resolution L26, the amendment submitted by Canada, on the basis that the pith and substance of the Canadian amendment had been substantially captured in the text of the Jordanian resolution in the preambular paragraphs, and particularly operating paragraph 7, which calls for the immediate and unconditional release of all civilians who have been illegally held captive, and demands their safety, well-being, and humane treatment in compliance with international law. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Sri Lanka. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation.
Are you ready to join the flip side? distinguished colleagues.
The Galaxy
I wish to
Z4
begin
fight.
by congratulating
Damn, this looks
all
super
those
cool.
members of the United Nations with the adoption
Man,
of such
look at the screen
an
size.
important and
Perfect for gaming.
extremely necessary in these current escalating conditions.
I'm ready to join the flip side.
This is not the victory of a national position. It's a position of common sense and justice and humanism. This is a clear reflection of the enormous concerns about the peaceful citizens of Israel and Gaza. That's something that joins us all together. This resolution is less than what we could and must do for them. Unfortunately, due to the position of Western delegations, the UN Security Council was unable to take any decision. In the General Assembly, the voice of all common sense members of the international community and Arab states was victorious, prevailed. Now, both states must listen. First and foremost, this is about an immediate ceasefire which must end the violence. This is particularly important due to information which is coming in on the start of ground operations in Gaza. It is unfortunate to note that our Western partners continue to remain silent on this issue and try to only see one side of this issue. Moreover, this approach is now being forced upon all member states. They believe that this does not respond to the tasks placed before this organization to ensure peace and security. We clearly condemned both the terrorist acts and the deaths of Israelis and other citizens in Israel, as well as the indiscriminate bombing of Gaza and the victims there. The draft resolution submitted to the General Assembly by our Jordani friends was the last opportunity, and the Canadian amendment made it clearly biased. It painted one side with black and the other white. The outcome of the votes showed once again that the responsibility of the international community is against the backdrop of the tragedy taking place in Gaza and the Middle East. It is time not to put forward any types of hypocritical interests. It's necessary to send a single signal, unified signal, to end violence and and to come back to peaceful negotiations at an appropriate UN forum, an UN-approved platform based on international legal basis. The outcome must be the creation of a sovereign Palestinian state within the 1967 borders, with its capital in East Jerusalem, living side by side in peace and security with Israel. This more than anything else will ensure safety amongst Middle East states, including Israel, and it will ensure peace in the region. Today's crisis is a tragedy, but it is a clear confirmation of the need to carry out these long since adopted Security Council and General Assembly resolutions and decisions. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Argentina.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Argentina voted in favor of the resolution. My country believes it's a priority to prevent the worsening of the clashes in Israel and Palestine and its potential expansion throughout the region. At the same time, Argentina condemns terrorism in all of its forms and manifestations and considers that terrorist acts are unacceptable, have no justification, and must be deplored by the international community as a whole. In this framework, I would like to reiterate emphatically and unequivocally, as my government did on the 7th of October, Argentina's firm condemnation of the terrorist attacks perpetrated by Hamas against Israel. And that is why we voted in favor of the draft amendment proposed by Canada to incorporate these concepts in the resolution that we have just adopted. And we regret the fact that it did not enjoy the necessary support. At the same time, without backing down on our position, we decided to accompany the resolution, even with these and other shortcomings, giving a priority to the United Nations to promote all efforts so that the humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip does not worsen, and for humanitarian assistance to reach those who require it. It's crucial to have full respect for international law, international human rights law, and international humanitarian law. And also, it's crucial that the civilian population be protected, regardless of their nationality. Hamas must release hostages immediately and unconditionally. And while we recognize the right to self-defense within the framework of respect for international law, we must also step up all of our calls directed to achieving a cessation of hostilities. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Argentina. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Iraq.
شكرا جزيلا السيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. President. At a time when my delegation expressed its regret, given the fact that the Council did not take on its responsibility to bring an end to the military aggression carried out by the Israeli occupying force, and also given the failure of the Council in the last 3 weeks, the failure to adopt a resolution which would put an end to the suffering of the Palestinian people, which forced them to resort to the General Assembly. However, the international community did not bear in mind the difficulty of the situation which the Palestinian population is suffering from because of the Israeli occupation, and we must this encouraged Israel to carry out a land invasion, defying the UN resolutions. Now, given the fact that my country is a member of 2 Arab groups and the Islamic group, we joined the consensus for this resolution. And despite the fact that there are many things that we do not agree with, that we expressed this opinion in the Council and in the Assembly. Our position to support the Palestinian people as to their right to create their own state with East Jerusalem as its capital. And we would like to modify our vote concerning the draft resolution L25. Our vote in favor of the resolution, our vote in favor of the resolution, because there was a technical problem at the time of the vote. My country would like to point out its objection to certain points in the draft resolution, which is opposed to our national law, and I hope that you're going to rectify that within the verbatim notes of this meeting. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Iraq. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Slovakia.
Mr. President, Slovakia reiterates our condemnation in strongest possible terms of Hamas for its brutal and indiscriminate terrorist attack across Israel. The use of civilians as human shields by Hamas is a particularly deplorable atrocity. We also emphasize Israel's right to defend itself in line with international law. The fundamental principles of conduct and of hostilities in IHL are proportionality, distinction, and precaution. As recalled by the UN a few days ago, war has rules, starting with the fundamental principle of respecting and protecting civilians. All civilians should be protected at all times. We call on Hamas to immediately release all hostages without any precondition. We also want to express our gravest concern for the deteriorating humanitarian situation in Gaza. We know the situation is at breaking point and that we need to act urgently in order to avoid a human catastrophe. We call for continued, rapid, safe, and unimpeded humanitarian access and aid to reach those in need. We recognize and agree with crucial humanitarian elements in the resolution. However, there are aspects of the highest importance of current escalations which are missing, and their reiteration is of utmost necessity. Some of these are condemnation of indiscriminate terrorist attacks perpetrated against Israel on 7th of October, confirmation and reiteration of Israel's right to self-defense, or call on immediate release of all hostages. These are just a few elements missing from the text, which Slovakia, together with other EU member states, strive to include to paint the full picture of current situation. Unfortunate non-consideration of these crucial points prevented Slovakia from supporting the resolution. Nevertheless, Slovakia remains committed to a lasting and sustainable peace based on the two-state solution and the relevant resolutions of the Security Council through reinvigorated efforts in the Middle East peace process. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Slovakia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Mr. President, at the outset, my delegation would like to once again strongly condemn the ongoing military attacks and new rounds of invasion into the Gaza Strip against Palestinian civilians by the Israeli regime. Mr. President, the Islamic Republic of Iran firmly believes that support to the cause of Palestine and Palestinian people must continue until they would be able to realize their fundamental rights, in particular the right to self-determination and establishment of an independent state of Palestine with Sharif as its capital. Historical experiences and recent developments demonstrated that Palestinians have no choice but to continue their resistance against occupation, aggression, and blatant violations of their rights. As we have stated before, we are of the view that the return of all Palestinian refugees to their homeland and holding a referendum for self-determination are the most effective and durable solution to the Palestinian question. Through that referendum, the Palestinian Muslims, Jews, and Christians will be able to choose their own political system and enjoy their rights fairly and equally. Mr. President, having stated our principled position today, my delegation voted in favor of the draft resolution L25 submitted to this 10th emergency special session and considers it a demonstration of the strong support of the international community for the cause of Palestine, in particular, the realization of the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to self-determination. Today's vote, both on draft resolution and the biased and politically motivated amendment proposed by Canada, is important and shows strong international support to Palestinians and their right to self-determination. It also put an end to fabricated narratives which tries to question the legitimacy of struggle by Palestinian people, including their armed struggle toward fulfilling these goals. Meanwhile, my delegation would like to reiterate the Palestinian people's inherent right to self-defense in the face of the Israeli regime's continued brutality and hostility against them. The right to self-defense, as recognized by international law and the United Nations Charter, extends to all Palestinians, including resistance movements such as Hamas, in their struggle against Israeli occupation and military aggression. Depriving Palestinians of these inherent rights is unacceptable as long as occupation and military aggression persists. Mr. President, as I have the floor, I would like to react to the references made in the statement of Canada to the Islamic Republic of Iran and its role in the region. Regrettably, the representative of Canada tried to whitewash Israeli aggression by shamelessly pointing fingers at Iran. Indeed, Canada persists to stay in the wrong side of history by taking sides with the darkness and by viciously supporting the military occupying regime of Israel that is brutally massacring innocent people right now. The level of hypocrisy and double standard is disgusting. Canada and the United States are complicit in the crimes of Israel, and they must be held to account before history. The actions taken by the certain Western countries, including provision of direct financial, intelligence, and military support to the Israeli regime, are clear violation of the United Nations Charter and international legal obligations of the United States, and as a result, hold it internationally responsible for criminal acts by the Israeli regime. Just to remind for record that the war crimes perpetrated by Canadian soldiers against Muslim people, especially in Afghanistan, without taking care of hierarchy, they will be taken responsible sooner or later. Mr. President, the Islamic Republic of Iran, while fully adhering to its international legal obligations, firmly supports and will continue to support the legitimate struggle of the Palestinian nation for the full realization of its inalienable right to self-determination. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of New Zealand.
Today's outcome is an important example of the UN General Assembly discharging our collective responsibility to respond to questions of international peace and security. We voted in support of the resolution after careful consideration. However, we are deeply disappointed that the resolution failed to identify Hamas as a terrorist entity and condemn its barbaric terror attacks on Israel on 7th of October. As I said this morning, we are appalled by their brutality, their targeting of civilians, and the taking of hostages. These are clear violations of international law. Further, the resolution would have benefited from a call for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages and a reference to Israel's right to defend itself in full compliance with international law, including in respect of the actions taken in Gaza. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of New Zealand. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kenya.
Mr. President, we voted in favor of the Gaza resolution and appreciate Jordan's consultative approach. The edits made to the text yesterday, acknowledging the 7th October terrorist attacks and the hostages taken by Hamas, and reaffirming the two-state solution met our minimum expectations. Our favorable vote aimed to address the emergency humanitarian needs of Palestinians in Gaza. However, the resolution did not go far enough in being clear about the terrorist attacks by Hamas that have launched us on this disastrous course. For that reason, we co-sponsored and voted in favor of the Canada Amendment for its explicit condemnation of Hamas terrorism and hostage-taking. With the world watching, once again, the General Assembly has taken action while the Security Council struggles to address threats to international peace and security. Each veto that contradicts the objective realities on the ground underscores the urgent need for Security Council reform. Without significant reform, the credibility and legitimacy of the Council, as viewed by the global populace, will continue to diminish. Mr. President, at the start of this debate, we listened closely to the representatives of Israel and Palestine. We were dismayed by their lack of empathy for each other's innocent civilian casualties. This entrenched partiality, this failure to recognize the shared humanity on both sides, is a fundamental